Final Fantasy XI, and frankly most MMOs from that generation, get a lot of credit for their intense difficulty. And yeah, some of this difficulty comes down to the amount of time invested to purely reach a level necessary to overcome the obstacles that are in front of you. But it's also just the nature of difficult RPGs. Multiplayer or not, difficult RPGs have enemy mechanics that are simply brutal, with counters that are few and far between, or frankly not available at all, and you just have to endure the attacks that the enemy's throwing at you. Specific spells or abilities are often required to best certain foes, either as counters to their own abilities or specific damaging techniques required to take something down, many of which are only available to specific classes, which of course leads to the cooperation element, but if you're alone, you're kind of screwed. With rose-colored glasses, we tend to look back as the good old days of MMOs when games were that difficult. You can see that with all the excitement that came around the release of World of Warcraft Classic. But does this level of difficulty have a place in modern MMOs? I think so, and let's talk about why. So hey guys, it's Hunt for Games. First of all, if you're new here, welcome. We tend to talk a lot about classic MMOs like Final Fantasy XI as well as other nostalgic throwbacks, but we do pepper in some new stuff here and there as well. If that sounds like your thing, definitely consider subscribing. We put out new videos each week, and if you've been here before, welcome back. But seriously, most modern MMOs don't really challenge the player through the majority of the game. Sure, there might be fights that have difficult mechanics that need to be learned, but chances are you do the fight once, you mess up, if that even fails the fight ultimately, or you just kind of screwed up for a second, you try again in 2 seconds and you generally win. Most of the mechanics come down to various ways to avoid getting hit. It's not necessarily counters and learning experiences of, this element works against this element, or this enfeebling effect needs to be countered with this. It's just don't stand in the fire. Enhancing that further, general enemies in the wild are rarely a threat. We've talked about this at great length in various videos about how the open world difficulty is something I miss a lot about older MMOs. And story missions themselves are rarely something that can't be soloed. They're almost always created to be soloed and aren't much of an obstacle. The true challenging content comes in the current season's endgame. I say season loosely because Final Fantasy XIV, for instance, doesn't really declare itself as having seasons, but the current endgame kind of continues to shift as new gear strengths are released every 6 months, 9 months, a year, that kind of stuff. But the mechanics in those like savage raids and other high-level difficult content tend to have like mechanics that are layered on top of each other. Things that you might have learned through the leveling experience will suddenly hit you at the same time, forcing more complex difficulty and more complex counters, and you have to learn as a group about how to continually rotate and maintain your damage output while not getting hit. These fights generally require a ton of skill, the utmost concentration, planning, and gear, but this is almost the cherry on top of an otherwise very approachable game meant for the very few that want to be challenged at that level immensely, but you don't ever have to touch it. I, in fact, have never done a single Savage content in 14. I've been playing for 10 years since it came out. Now, some will immediately argue that Final Fantasy XI had a very similar formula, that it wasn't really necessarily a difficult game grinding out through the levels till 75, and it wasn't until the end game missions and content that the difficulty really started ramping up. But I would argue that instead, the world itself never stopped being a threat, even if you don't want to look at the missions and quests at lower levels that were incredibly challenging. I mean, those Promi missions were insane at level 30. But the world itself, the enemies that you fought, were always dangerous. Sure, we might have gotten used to fighting something like the Antica that could silence, petrify, bind us before using damaging and offensive magic spells and attacks that could wipe us out in a single blow, but only because we prepared ourselves with stuns, white mages casting Stona. Being able to prepare and counter these challenges doesn't make the mechanics any less dangerous. It just means that we've learned to adapt to a challenging offensive enemy. And usually we did that by grouping up and challenging it with a multitude of offensive and defensive abilities that everybody could bring to the table. If you were fighting some of these enemies alone just for farming individual efforts, you were just traveling and one happened to catch you unawares, you may not be able to truly counter any of these effects at all. You can only win with just pure outright strength, countering the fact that they can do all these things to you, and you just overwhelming force crush the enemy. You're level 60, they're level 35. You're gonna win even though they're an incredibly dangerous enemy. Although I feel like everyone always looks at like a Marlboro and they're like, I don't know. How much higher do I have to be to successfully take this guy on? I don't really want to find out. We loved it, and I say all this to say that many argue it just doesn't fit today's mold. It drives too many players away. Too many players start to play a game like that, and they're like, I can't figure it out. There's too much danger. There's too much intensity in each and every fight. I want to have a little bit more relaxation. It's just not for me. Games like Ashes of Creation, Pantheon Rise of the Fallen are trying to suggest otherwise by bringing back some of those classic models of like unique cooperation. You need to better understand your enemy before the fight. You can't just react middle of the fight and hope to get through it fine. They're trying to suggest that there's still a place for that difficulty, and I think they're right. And all we need to do is look to some of the most successful games out right now. Destiny 2 and Elden Ring. Now, Elden Ring is probably an easy, understandable one. We'll get to that in a second. But Destiny 2, you might be saying, guys, there's a ton of easy ways to approach Destiny 2. They even have 2 versions of the most recent storyline content. One, which is you start out at a harder level difficulty and can get better rewards for just doing that content. And one more of a story mode where you can just learn the story, finish it out, and then go back and grind and do some of the more difficult stuff afterwards if you want to. And I think that's a great approach. But Destiny 2 has offered some of the most challenging mechanics and raid sequences and content that I've seen in most modern group-based games, with little to no way to communicate amongst each other. Now, players have found ways to get around that with various types of voice chat and then, you know, Discord and forums and everything. So I'm not going to say that like communication isn't happening, but it is kind of funny that with a game that you basically can't talk to anybody else, you can't type out, they introduced this content that is really hard. and they're just like, good luck, guys. I'm sure you'll figure it out. And people love it. I'm not saying everybody that plays Destiny 2 goes for that level of content. And Destiny 2 has a great ramp-up system of like, whatever level you want to approach the game in terms of difficulty, you can do that. You can approach it at an easier level, you'll get smaller rewards. You can approach it at a harder level, you get greater rewards, etc. But it definitely draws in a ton of players. The amount of players playing Destiny 2 is huge. People love it. Elden Ring, I think, is an even better example. I just picked up Elden Ring today. I've played a lot of the Souls games. I've beaten none of them. I beat Demon Souls. That was the only one I beat. I haven't beaten Bloodborne. I never played Dark Souls 2, Dark Souls 3. I played a little bit. I always get to a point where I'm like, I can't take it anymore, and I just kind of stop. I'm excited about Elden Ring, though. It seems like it's bringing back a lot of the classic elements that everybody loves about the Souls games, with some new changes that make it a little bit more approachable in terms of the multiplayer elements and ways to just approach things differently, which is great. But what makes the Souls games unique and why they've become almost a genre unto themselves these days, with people saying like, oh, it's a Souls-like game. It's a what's it? Souls Light is another version if it's like a, not really. All that means is brutally challenging with little to no warning that you're about to get utterly annihilated. And many times just things that there's no way to brute force something. You have to just keep trying it and getting better until you can truly understand the mechanics well enough to challenge the fights and enemies that you're up against. They are so popular. They're so popular. They've spawned multiple spin-offs. Spin-offs is the wrong word. It's not always the same company, but like people are constantly trying to mimic that formula because it brings back an older type of video game style that was just, you didn't always have easy solutions. Some of them were just brutally mean. And everyone says Elden Ring, the Souls games, every time you lose, it's because of something dumb that you did, and you can learn to be better. And to an extent, that is true. You can learn the mechanics, you can learn how to counter it. At its core, it's very similar to like fighting games in that, like, if you learn the move sets, how to counter, how to act, how to dodge, and attack when appropriate, you can beat any enemy. True, but sometimes it just drops stuff on you, and you're not going to know about it until the first time you go through that area, and it happens. You can expect something to happen, but it could still surprise you. And then once you've learned that, next time you come back through, you're like, I know this is going to happen. I can expect it. Those are two types of difficulty. There's just like, I know the mechanics. I know how to counter and attempt to beat certain elements. And then I know the level and the area well enough that I know what's coming. Both are valid. But people love it. Elden Ring is blowing up. Everyone is so excited about this game. It's so challenging and so rewarding to win, and people like that you can play it in a multiplayer aspect so that when it gets a little bit too hard, you can pull in strangers or friends to try and beat those challenges, and everyone loves that approach. I'm not saying it's for everybody, and that's fine. There are other games that are less challenging. I'm not even sure it's for me. It might be too challenging for me. But MMOs have gotten away from that at a core level. That for the most of the leveling experience, most of the game, they have that level of challenge that makes you want to be with other players because of how difficult it can be to go alone. I think these games that literally are multiplayer games, Destiny 2, Elden Ring, are showing why multiplayer difficulty is desired and people want it. And I think that if MMOs can get back to that, if Pantheon Rise of the Fallen, Ashes of Creation, when they come out, can show maybe it's not for everybody. The games don't have to be developed for the entirety of all gamers. Games can be a group, a niche. And I think we're going to find that they're very successful in that niche. If they're just, overall good games. You can't just be difficult. You have to have meaningful gameplay and content and storylines and everything else. But I want to hear what you guys think. I've been kind of rambling a little bit, but I've been hearing this one a lot, that like these older games are too difficult. Games can be difficult without being life-sucking grinds. Sure, a level of grind, a level of slow-paced leveling that you can like appreciate the long journey that it took you to get from point A to point B, I think is a good thing. But it doesn't have to be like it was in the mid-2000s, where it took a year to get from 1 to 75 if you were like taking your time and learning 11. You can have a slow-paced grind without it being life-suckingly destructive. But the difficulty, I think, is what we really miss. The difficulty and the complexity that give you the sense of reward that you are learning elements of these fights, whether it be something that the enemy can do, something the enemy is weak to, and learning how to utilize that to your advantage. And then when you encounter those enemies again, they're much less difficult because you understand how to approach them. I love that feeling. 11 was full of that, with all the elemental weaknesses and strengths, the enfeebles, the different ways that you can and can't counter certain things, stuns, binds, all that stuff. I want to see it back, but I want to hear your thoughts. Is difficulty at that level something that can fit in modern games, or is it a relic of times gone by, and most games are now trying to be more enjoyable and more approachable to the general populace, and that's a better approach? I want to hear what you guys think. Leave a comment in the comment section below if you think that it's something that should or should not be in modern games, or come join us on Tuesdays and Thursdays, 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time on Twitch. We stream every week, usually a lot of Final Fantasy 11, but all sorts of stuff, to be honest. So let me know what you think. I want to see you there, and keep on the lookout for more videos like this. I'll see you guys all in the next one. Peace. I think it shows that like an iterative, but with the iterative model, and I'm going so off kilter here, but like, would the iterative model of every 2 years we have a new storyline work if it was a single player experience and people weren't drawn back in because of the whole multiplayer aspect and their friends and all the